A loaf of bread still sits inside an ancient oven. A love message is still scratched onto a wall. A dog still strains against its chain. For nearly 2,000 years, they waited beneath volcanic ash, perfectly preserved. Pompeii isn't remembered because it was destroyed. History is filled with cities that disappeared. Pompeii is remembered because one ordinary day never ended. When archaeologists uncovered the city, they didn't find the story of an empire. They found unfinished meals, abandoned shops, children's toys, election posters, graffiti complaining about neighbors. It was as if an ordinary Tuesday had been frozen in time. But that raises an extraordinary question. How did one ordinary Roman city become history's greatest time capsule? To answer it, we have to return to the final morning of Pompeii, not knowing what its people never knew. That by sunset, their world would be gone. The day began like countless others. Before sunrise, ovens were already glowing across the city as bakers prepared fresh bread for the morning crowds. Shopkeepers lifted wooden shutters. Wine merchants rolled barrels through narrow streets, polished smooth by generations of footsteps. The public baths filled with conversation as neighbors exchanged gossip, discussed business, and argued about politics. Children hurried through the forum, while traders called out prices from market stalls overflowing with fruit, olives, and fish brought in from the Bay of Naples. Pompeii wasn't a city waiting to become history. It was busy living its ordinary life. That ordinary life is exactly what makes it extraordinary today. History usually preserves kings and conquerors. Pompeii preserved everyone else. The walls still tell their stories. Unlike most ancient cities, Pompeii is covered in graffiti. Some messages advertised gladiator games, others supported local politicians, many were jokes. One simply reads, "Successus loves Iris, but she doesn't love him." It's funny, a little awkward, and unmistakably human. The people who wrote these words never imagined anyone beyond their neighbors would read them. Instead, they ended up speaking to the entire future. Watching over the city stood Mount Vesuvius. Today we see a volcano. The people of Pompeii saw fertile farmland. Its slopes were covered with vineyards and orchards. Families had lived beneath the mountain for generations without ever witnessing an eruption. The last major explosion had happened so long ago that it had passed from living memory. The mountain wasn't feared. It was trusted. Its volcanic soil helped make the surrounding countryside among the richest in Italy. Everything that gave Pompeii life came from the mountain. No one imagined it would also bring death. 17 years before the disaster, the ground shook violently. An earthquake damaged homes, temples, and public buildings throughout the city. For many communities, that might have been the beginning of the end. For Pompeii, it was simply another challenge. Builders repaired cracked walls, merchants reopened their shops. Life continued. Even as smaller tremors rattled the city over the following years, people barely changed their routines. Today we know those earthquakes were warning signs. The Romans didn't. They had no science of volcanoes, no way of understanding what was happening beneath their feet. As far as anyone was concerned, tomorrow would look exactly like today. And that assumption would cost thousands of lives. Shortly after midday, another tremor rippled beneath the streets. Few people paid much attention. Earthquakes had become part of daily life. Then a deep roar echoed across the Bay of Naples. People turned toward the mountain. A vast column of ash and rock blasted into the sky, climbing higher and higher until it resembled a giant pine tree spreading across the heavens. Some stopped to watch. Others climbed onto rooftops for a better view. A few simply shrugged and carried on with their day. No one had ever seen anything like it. No one understood what it meant. Then the ash began to fall. At first it drifted gently through the air, settling across rooftops like gray snow. It looked almost harmless. But within that quiet shower, the fate of Pompeii had already been sealed. At first the ash seemed almost harmless. Tiny flakes drifted through the streets, settling on rooftops, market stalls, and the shoulders of curious onlookers. Children reached out to catch them. Merchants paused in their work and glanced nervously toward the mountain before returning to their customers. Surely it would pass. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Then the stones began to fall. Chunks of white pumice crashed onto tiled roofs, bounced through narrow streets, and shattered against walls. Every minute, the impacts grew louder. The strange spectacle had become a disaster. Panic spread through the city. Shopkeepers abandoned their stores without locking the doors. Parents searched desperately for their children. Neighbors shouted to one another through the growing haze. Within an hour, Pompeii no longer looked like the city that had awakened that morning. The eruption continued without pause. Above Vesuvius, a towering column of ash and volcanic rock climbed higher into the sky, visible for miles across the Bay of Naples. Modern scientists estimate it reached more than 20 miles into the atmosphere. The mountain wasn't erupting, it was exploding. With every passing hour, more pumice rained onto the city. The streets became increasingly difficult to cross. Loose volcanic stone swallowed sandals with every step. Some people wrapped blankets around their heads. Others carried cushions to protect themselves from the falling rocks. Many clutched small bags filled with jewelry or coins. They weren't abandoning their homes forever. They believed they would return in a few days. As afternoon turned to evening, daylight slowly disappeared, not because the sun had set, but because the ash cloud had swallowed it. Oil lamps flickered in the middle of the day. The air grew thick with dust that scratched at the throat and burned the eyes. People could barely see the ends of the streets they had walked their entire lives. The familiar city was disappearing around them. Even then, many stayed. From our perspective, that seems impossible. Why didn't everyone run? Because people don't usually expect the worst. Psychologists call it normalcy bias, our tendency to believe that today's emergency will soon become tomorrow's inconvenience. The people of Pompeii weren't reckless. They were human. They had survived earthquakes before. They assumed they would survive this one too. Across the bay, a young Roman named Pliny the Younger watched the eruption unfold from a safe distance. He would later describe the enormous cloud rising above Vesuvius, comparing it to a giant pine tree with branches spreading across the sky. His letters remain the most important eyewitness account of the disaster. Nearby, his uncle, Pliny the Elder, commander of the Roman fleet, made a decision that would define his legacy. When news arrived that people were trapped along the coastline, he ordered ships toward the volcano. Curiosity became a rescue mission. Ash rained onto the decks. Hot rocks crashed into the sea around the fleet. Still, Pliny pressed forward. He reached the town of Stabiae, where he tried to calm frightened residents. Before morning, overcome by volcanic gases, he collapsed and died. His nephew's account ensured that both the eruption and the rescue attempt would never be forgotten. Back in Pompeii, the city was running out of time. The weight of ash crushed rooftops one after another. Families sheltering indoors suddenly found themselves trapped beneath collapsing timber and stone. Others struggled toward the city gates, through streets buried beneath meters of pumice. Some escaped, many didn't. Then, shortly before dawn, the eruption changed. The towering column above Vesuvius became unstable and collapsed back toward the mountain. A wall of superheated gas, ash, and shattered rock raced down its slopes at terrifying speed. It was a pyroclastic flow. It moved faster than anyone could run, hotter than any fire the city had ever known. There was no warning, no escape. The surge swept through Pompeii, rushing into streets, homes, and public buildings within seconds. Near one of the city gates, a group of men, women, and children collapsed together only moments before reaching safety. Today, they are known simply as the fugitives. Elsewhere, a dog remained chained where its owner had left it. The baker never returned to his oven. The love message stayed on the wall. The ordinary Tuesday we began with had come to an end. By sunrise, Pompeii had disappeared beneath a silent blanket of ash. The city wasn't burned. It wasn't washed away. It was sealed, waiting nearly 17 centuries for the world to uncover it again. When the eruption ended, Pompeii was gone. Nearly 20 feet of volcanic ash and rock buried the city so completely that roads, homes, and temples vanished beneath the landscape. To anyone passing by, there was almost no sign that thousands of people had once lived there. The survivors rebuilt their lives elsewhere. Children who escaped grew into adults. Parents told stories of the city that had been lost. Then those stories faded. Within a few generations, Pompeii had slipped into legend. For almost 17 centuries, the city remained hidden beneath the earth. Then, in 1748, workers digging near Naples uncovered painted walls unlike anything they had ever seen. As excavations continued, an entire Roman city slowly emerged from the ash. Streets appeared exactly where they had been left. Homes still contained furniture. Wine jars remained stacked in storerooms. Shops looked as though their owners had simply stepped outside for a moment. Archaeologists soon realized they hadn't discovered ruins. They had discovered a moment. Pompeii hadn't been worn away by time. It had been locked away from it. Every doorway, every street, and every forgotten object offered a glimpse into a world that had vanished almost overnight. Then came the discovery that changed archaeology forever. In the 19th century, Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli noticed strange hollow spaces inside the hardened ash. He believed they had once contained human bodies. To test his idea, he poured liquid plaster into the cavities. When the surrounding ash was removed, people appeared once again, not as statues, not as skeletons, but exactly as they had spent their final moments. A man shielding his face, friends lying beside one another, a child curled against an adult, and a dog still twisting desperately against the chain that had held it in place. The casts were heartbreaking, but they also achieved something extraordinary. For the first time, history wasn't telling us about emperors or generals. It was introducing us to ordinary people. The same baker who had risen before dawn, the same neighbors who had argued in the baths, the same young man who had scratched a message onto a wall declaring his love for Iris. Suddenly, they weren't distant figures from the ancient world. They felt familiar. Modern science has continued telling their story. Using CT scans, DNA analysis, and chemical testing, researchers have learned what many of Pompeii's residents ate, the work they performed, and in some cases where they grew up. They've even challenged one of the oldest assumptions about the disaster. For centuries, historians believed the eruption happened in late August. But discoveries including autumn fruit, warm clothing, and a charcoal inscription suggest it likely occurred later, perhaps in October. Even after 2,000 years, Pompeii continues to reveal new secrets. Its story is still being written. Mount Vesuvius still watches over the Bay of Naples today. Millions of people now live close to the volcano, making it one of the most carefully monitored in the world. Scientists track earthquakes, volcanic gases, and movements beneath the mountain every day, searching for the warning signs the people of Pompeii could never have understood. They weren't careless. They simply lacked the knowledge we have today. That may be Pompeii's greatest lesson. Knowledge doesn't stop nature, but it gives us a chance. So why does Pompeii still capture our imagination? Not because it was destroyed, but because it preserved something history almost always loses. An ordinary day, the loaf of bread left inside the oven, the politician asking for votes, the joke scratched onto a wall, the shopkeeper expecting customers, the child hurrying through the streets, the dog waiting faithfully for its owner to return. None of them believed they were making history. They thought tomorrow would come. It didn't. And that is why Pompeii still speaks to us. History usually remembers emperors. Pompeii remembers everyone else. It reminds us that behind every great historical event are ordinary people living ordinary lives, never realizing how precious those moments truly are. The city wasn't preserved so we could marvel at a volcano. It was preserved so we could remember the people, A baker, a child, a family, a city. One ordinary day that never ended. The end. If you enjoy uncovering the stories hidden beneath history, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next documentary.